Hi, and welcome to Connected, a podcast brought to you by Nova Economics Club, where we try to bridge the gap between academic theory and everyday discourse of economics. My name is Miguel Andrade. I'm a master's student at Nova of economics, and I'm today joined by Vitor Bento. Hi, Vitor. You've been a prominent figure in the banking sector of Portugal. You've worked at the Bank of Portugal. You've worked at the Ministry of Finance, in the Treasury, I believe.
Yes.
You were also there in the transition from Banco Espírito Santo to Novo Banco, I think. And most importantly, and what we're going to talk about today, is your book, Forte, Fraco, which directly translated is a strong euro, a weak euro. And I'll start by asking, you explain in your book that the weakest point of the euro is the fact that Western European countries are sort of divided into these two cultural groups, right? I mean, historically, I think it was Max Weber that was the one among the first sociologists that mentioned this northern Protestant ethic in the Catholic South, and you argue that this affects how countries rank their preferences regarding their economies. What I wanted to ask is there empirical evidence that confirms that there is this division between a strong euro group, which is typically associated with the northern European countries, and the weak euro group that is commonly associated with the southern part of Europe? And how did these two groups differ throughout the second half of the 20th century from an economic point of view?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, it's for me a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm touched that you have reminded of that publication and of that time, and I will try to correspond as best as possible to your curiosity. It's interesting that you bring that about, because I almost forget that. But yes, being direct to your questions, in fact, there was a kind of a difference. Starting over. In fact, different countries have different cultures. Like companies, like societies, they have different cultural backgrounds that were built up throughout the time, throughout the development, so on. And regarding monetary preferences, it was clearly a difference at that time between the countries of the northern. I would not necessarily associate that to Max Weber, but it can be. But the idea was not that, and the countries in the south, and that could have been demonstrated at the time, because the countries of the northern part, they were more adverse, more intolerant vis-à-vis inflation, and the countries in the south, they were more tolerant of inflation, which means that they were used to different monetary regimes, so to speak. So the countries in the north were stricter in terms of the monetary regime, so they were intolerant with inflation, which means that monetary policy was tougher. Countries in the south, like our example, we had got used to live with inflation, and therefore the monetary regime that was best adapted to our practice was more relaxed, so to speak. We had at that time, just to give an example of our own case, so when it was to decide about wage adaptations, so it was very tolerant. It was regardless of the competitiveness. So for political reasons, the increases in wages could be granted at an incomfortable level that was not comfortable with the competitiveness, but it created social peace. And then what was the reaction of the companies to that excess of salaries? Was to increase the prices, and to increase the prices, they needed the monetary policy to accommodate that increase, which means that translated into inflation, because inflation is a general increase in prices. But then we had the economy had a problem of competitiveness, because with higher inflation than the competitors, we are losing in competitiveness. So how was the circle concluded? By devaluation. So the currency was devalued in order to reimpose the levels of competitiveness, which means that in the end, the wage increases in real times were really the necessary, because people had to accept sometimes a real decrease in the wages, but it went through this process of monetary expansion, inflation, then devaluation of the currency. When we were the countries in the north, they were less tolerant with inflation, so the monetary policy did not accommodate increases, undue increases in salaries and in prices. But so when we join these two cultures into a single currency, that created a kind of a shock, because countries in the south, they maintain their behavior, and as it can be seen, the inflation or the increase in prices in the southern countries became higher than the increase in prices in the northern part, making the countries, those economies, less competitive. But then there was a problem, because the currency was the same, so it could not be devalued. So what we are used to could not be devalued. So what was the consequence? Deficit in the external accounts. So we started to increase deficit in the external accounts and accumulating external debt. So we were big accumulators of external debt until the crisis. In a nutshell, this is the story.
Not just Portugal, you mean?
No, it was Portugal, it was Spain, it was Greece, it was Italy. In different degrees, that's true, because also the inflationary experiences were different. Greece and Portugal, they had higher levels, but that was common. And those were also, they were then the countries that were in the center of the crisis of the euro, because they could not live with a stable currency, so they had accumulated external debt, and it was that external debt that was the deficit in balance of payments that was the source of the crisis. It was not public debt. All the story, it goes around public debt, but it was not public debt per se. It was external debt, because the countries at certain point found it difficult to renew their financing from abroad. So that the external credit, they had got used to, and because they could not renew that, so they were at the door of bankruptcy, and then they had to be rescued by the programs of rescue.
Yeah, and of course, like you're saying, and you said in the beginning that, again, cultures, when you include cultures in the analysis, it can get a bit muddy again, and you say again that this division between the strong euro and the weak euro group, especially if you think about the north and the south, is not necessarily perfect. It's not straightforward. Again, Ireland was a part of the so-called PIGS acronym, and on the other hand, you have France, which is supposed to be a Mediterranean country and is commonly found in the strong euro group. So in your book, you sort of find this new classification, or this system of classification between this the hardcore group and the Greco-Latin group. And so I just wanted to ask, what was the criterion used to divide these countries in this way, and what changes from the strong euro weak group division to this hardcore versus Greco-Latin division, and if you still believe in that classification.
At that time, we will come to the present. But at that time, the division was mostly explained by the economic and financial behavior. And in fact, Ireland, in spite of being, having a better performance of the real economy, in terms of the financial aspects, it was on the same side. They also they had higher inflation, they had a weaker currency beforehand, and so then they were faced also with this problem of accumulation of external deficits, external debt, and it's why they were caught up with when the crisis came up. So the main division was really financial, and in fact it was reflected in the crisis. So the countries that had to be rescued were the ones that really were exposed in that position. You mentioned, well, first of all, sometimes these kind of divisions are not very clear cut. So it means that you have to define criteria in order to make the classification, and that criteria are not always clear cut. This is not exact science, but it's very approximate. And in fact, the case that is perhaps more intriguing at that time is the case of France, because France is in the middle of the bridge. So it does not belong to one, it does not belong to the other, and it has closeness to the countries of the south, because they had also some imbalances, but they had faced their problems earlier on, and they had been forced to adjust earlier on. For instance, in 1981, I'm quoting by heart, so that may be an error of 1 or 2 years, but in 1881 or something close to that, when Mitterrand was elected president, and he came from the left. The presidents in France had been on the right, so he came from the left. He was supported by a left front that comprised Socialist Party and the Communist Party, and then he had a kind of a social program, very aggressive, and he tried really to impose a very social active program. And then he was faced with a weakening of the French franc. So the French franc started to slide down, and because France wanted to be shown as a strong currency country, for them that was a serious problem. Then they had to be supported at that time, one, by Germany, and that second, they had to reverse the policy. So they were forced to reverse the policy, and from then on, they learned that they cannot go against the logic of the market, the logic of the market equilibrium, and therefore, so from then on, they were less exposed than the countries that were still the other countries of the south. Nevertheless, when it was the big crisis of the European monetary system, I'm talking about between 92 and 95, also the French franc was under severe attack, and it had to be rescued by Germany. But then Germany, the Central Bank of Germany, on political reasons, stepped in a clear demonstration of support of the French franc, because they needed to have a strong partner as a political guide of Europe and a political guide for the monetary union. And then they were supported, so they were prevented to have the sliding down that the other countries had. But nevertheless, so they had their crisis earlier on, they were more adjusted, and that's why they were able to stay in the middle of the bridge, so to speak.
You're talking about this, the political support that Germany felt like it needed to give to France at some point. And I think it would be interesting if you could explain, again, talking about not necessarily how these cultures affect the preferences that countries give regarding their economy. I would ask, how do you think that the Greco-Latin group was, again, it was at some point more populous and had a higher GDP than the hardcore group, and why do you think that the euro was created with these rules that kind of favor the economic model of the hardcore group? Do you agree with this? Do you think there's like this cultural imposition from the north on the south, or from the hardcore group on the southern group, especially during the austerity measures? How do you think this all relates? Again, Germany is the modern Germany is often referred to an order liberal country. So like they have a focus on controlled fiscal budgets. Again, that obsession with you have to pay your debts. Kind of a mercantilist view. Again, they're an exporting country, which differs from the economic nature of many of the southern countries. Do you think that there is this cultural imposition, and how does that affect the economies of southern Europe?
Well, I mean, your question or your bunch of questions would allow us. We could stay here all the afternoon because they are all interesting points. They are all very interesting points, and some of those points have been missed since then. Let me try to give a broad picture without being too extensive. First of all, it is very important for us to understand the present, to know the history, and that is really very important. And therefore, in order to understand the position of Germany at the time in particular, one has to look at their own history. Germany, after the First World War, faced several and very traumatic problems of different nature. I'm just concentrating on the ones that are more economic and more monetary. They had a huge inflation, an hyperinflation in 1923, of the kind that people had to go. People had to go out to the supermarket or whatever several times during the day because the prices are increasing at the time. So you order a coffee, the price of the coffee when you finish drinking the coffee was different when you start.
You better pay at the beginning.
Yes, that's right. Of course, sometimes there is a bit of an exaggeration because this kind of extreme happened during a very short period. But the process of inflation was really lasting. It lasted 1 or 2 years, and it was quite dramatic because people that were used to have fixed income, like public workers, civil servants, teachers, many of the things, savers, people that have been saving, so they lost their money. So people, there were houses that were sold to foreigners by $20 or something. I might be exaggerating, but it's the difference is not that big. Well, there is a story of someone, an American, that went with $10 and enjoyed the whole evening in Berlin, and in the end it still got money left out of that, and he had quite a life with a bunch of friends in dinner, drinks, and whatever. So this was very traumatic for them. Then they had another crisis which was by the end of the 20s, when there was the big depression in the world economy. Germany was also very affected, and the level of unemployment got up very, very high, and it was one of the triggers for the success of the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party, they got elected and got popular. On the back of these two crises. During the Nazi time, there was also a program of monetary creation, but that did not translate immediately in inflation because the prices were under control. So the inflation was not noticeable, but people accumulated money balances that they could not use, which means that inflation was not eliminated but was repressed. When the war ended and it was necessary to reorganize Germany, they had to add a monetary reform in order to prevent those money balances that had been accumulated to be transformed into consumption that would give rise to another inflation shock. Then what they did, they created a monetary reform where most of those excess balances were destroyed. For instance, you had 100 marks and it was exchanged by 10 marks of the new currency, or so on. So people lost again some of the money that they had accumulated. So this was very traumatic. So this idea of excess money supply became very, very, very traumatic. And then there was this reform. They created a new currency. Beforehand, they had the Reichsmark, so they created the Deutsche Mark. They created a central bank, which was the Bundesbank. It was not immediate, but for this purpose, suppose that. So they created central bank, and central bank devoted themselves to control the price level, to control the inflation, and it was very successful. And it created the basis for a rebirth of the economy, and the real economy developed quite quickly and became the strong economy later on. So therefore, these ideas of being the monetary rectitude, being totally against inflation, and being very strict in monetary management became almost like parts of a religion in Germany. And that was real for them. They were basic values, and we have to understand that they were basic values because they understood that as the basis of their economic success, and in particular as getting rid of the ghosts of the 20s and of the 30s. So when it came to time to create a single currency, for the currencies, one step back. So after that time, because of the different preferences, there was always exchange rate instability in Europe, where the Deutsche Mark was the stronger currency, and it was kind of the center of a constellation around which the other currencies moved, but they had to devalue it from time to time. And of course, all the other countries were very envy of the success of the Germany, and they wanted to somehow to take control on their power. And then the idea of creating a single currency was some way, because the power would be divided by all the countries, for them to get the grip on this power of Germany.
Who do you mean? So I just wanted to ask, who do you mean they? Like, is it other countries in the European Union?
France in first place.
Especially.
I will tell you. I mean, if we have time, ask me about the atomic bomb of Germany, because there is an interesting story.
Please, yeah.
And then, so they wanted to take that control. In Germany, they understood that if they allowed to dilute their monetary strictness, they would end up with the inflation that the other countries were used to. And for them was something unbelievable, because that would jeopardize all their success, and it would disrupt all their economic structure. So they were very reluctant to that. Therefore, the solution for that was kind of, okay, they agreed in giving up their own currency in exchange for a common currency, but the rules have to be defined by them. So the new currency had to import the monetary rules that prevail in Germany and that have given the success of the Deutsche Mark. So that's why the single currency, it had to inherit these principles, this monetary orthodoxy of Germany, because otherwise it would not be accepted, because Germany was not very keen on the single currency. But at that time, there were two visions in Europe regarding the creation of the single currency. At that time, and even before, this is a story that goes back to the 70s, when there was another movement trying to create a single currency, and there were two views. One view that considered that, okay, you create a single currency, and then the economies converge to the same high level. And there was another vision, which was shared by Germany and the Netherlands, namely, that was no. First, the economies, they have to converge their behavior and their social preferences, and when everyone is aligned, then there are conditions for the success of the single currency. So they were not very keen, and it's why it was imposed this convergence criteria that all the countries have to meet for 2 years before being able to join the single currency. But this occurred in a hurry. It was in a very short time span. The political will was very strong, and there was no proper time for the trial really to be executed. And it was a bit of a rush for everyone to join, and it's why some countries join without being prepared to live with the rules of the hard euro. I prefer to call it hard with the rules of the hard euro, and that led to the consequences that we have discussed. But after the crisis, things somehow changed, and nowadays this kind of incompatibility does not exist anymore, at least at that strong level. But there was an adjustment on both sides. because if the strict rules had prevailed during the euro crisis, we would not have euro today. In order for the euro to survive, two basic rules have to be dropped, not legally, but in practice. So, in legal terms, they still exist, but in practice, they were overcome. What were those two rules? No bailout, the rule of no bailout, but in the end, the countries that were facing bankruptcy, they were bailed out, fortunately, because otherwise we would not have euro. And the second is that it was forbidden for the central bank to finance the governments, and that was also overcome. So the central bank does not finance directly, but finances indirectly because they buy the debt on the secondary market. But the debt is issued to certain primary dealers with the purpose to be resold to the central bank. So in fact, the central bank has been financing the governments, and these two overrules of the rules were the key for the success of the euro, because otherwise the euro would have disappeared. So nowadays, these strict rules have been adjusted, and on the other hand, those countries that were less accommodative to the hard rules, they became more accommodative. And you look at Portugal, when everyone today talks about the phrase is accounts. Certain accounts, or contas certas in Portuguese. So accounts pretty neat, so to speak. So this is, in fact, an incorporation of a principle that did not exist at the beginning of the euro, and it's why, in our case, we had high deficits, and we had accumulation of public debt, and so on. And nowadays, everyone recognizes that is not possible. So this big difference, they have been smoothed.
So do you think there might have been this imposition by Germany at the beginning of the euro with the rules about the convergence terms and conditions that had to be adjusted throughout the evolution, especially after the sovereign debt crisis? Do you think that the euro and the European Central Bank could have never been born without those two rules?
Yes, that I'm completely convinced. First of all, because Germany would not accept. Yeah. So would not accept, or it would have required a very narrow group to move on, of people of which they were convinced that would be abiding by those principles, voluntarily abiding by those principles. So that was really, really necessary in order to have a broader participation. But the two things at the same time, so this was necessary to have a broader group joining the euro, but at the same time, the experience lived since then forced the countries in the south to adjust their preference functions to the dominant preference function. So it was a kind of a move. So everyone took a step in direction of the middle. As in the book, somehow I said that this can be done one way or another way, or eventually by a combination, and in fact it was a combination. So there was a convergence in the preferences, and it was a more tolerance with the rigidity of the rules, which is what we have today. And I tend to say that today we are settled on that front.
More settled. Narrowing down a bit more on Portugal, what do you think have been the consequences of applying this strong euro or hard euro regime? Namely, we can say that Portugal has not grown much since 1999. GDP per capita, on average, in annual growth between 1999 and 2021 was equal to 2.5%. How do you think, again, this approach?
This is a consequence of the social preferences in Portugal. So the social preferences translated into policies were inconsistent with the need for the development of the economy. because during that time, in particular during the first part, what we our competitive sector, so the tradable sector, became non-competitive and lost weight in the economy. And the sector that gained weight in the economy was the non-tradable sector. The other book is about that. And therefore we created a kind of a decoupling between profitability and productivity. So the sectors that became more profitable were not necessarily the sectors where productivity could grow faster. I'm talking about the services, where the productivity does not grow very much, but were made the profitable sector because they did not have to compete with the external economies. So they were acting in a protected economy. The other sector that had to compete with the external economy, and in particular at that time with the emergence of China, the Eastern European countries and so on, so they lost competitiveness, they shrank, but they were the ones where the productivity could really grow more. But because they were not profitable, so they lacked the investment to develop themselves. So we had an economic development where productivity did not grow, and productivity not growing, GDP per capita cannot grow, and so most of the investment took place in the non-tradable sector. Took place where it was profitable, but where productivity did not grow, and that was the key source of our backwardness in terms of economic growth, and that has remained. And for instance, if you go see the statistics, by that time we had a very high level of investment, but we had the lowest level in Europe of the marginal efficiency of the capital, which means that investments were not productive. There were investments in highways, in things like that. So we had almost 3 highways from Lisbon to Oporto, and that fall into diminishing returns, because when you create the first highway from Lisbon to Oporto, productivity increases because the economy becomes more flexible. When you build another one, the increase in productivity is zero. You had the investment, but it does not increase productivity because it was not necessary. There was no constraint in the flow of the transaction. So that was main the reason that led us to be backward at that time.
Do you think, in your book, you say that this to regain this competitiveness in a strong Euro scenario, these countries, the weak Euro countries, they should pursue, I think you said, financial rigor and flexibility in the product and labor markets, which I think for some is sort of like a very complicated way of saying deregulation. You also attribute the low competitiveness of the post-Euro, weak Euro countries to past voluntarist wage increases, or in other words, that they have a preference for higher wages, which suggests that these countries have wages that are too high to be competitive in a strong Euro scenario. Do you think, I mean, the book is from 2013, do you still think that these are measures that Portugal should abide to?
First of all, the problem of the wages being higher or lower, or being too high or too low, has to do by comparing with productivity. So they are excessive if they are not matched by productivity. If the wage growth is not matched by productivity growth, then you create a problem. So it's not the value, it's not the level in itself. But then that leads me to another problem, which it's perhaps more prevalent today, and your generation is suffering the consequences of that. Part of the prevalent ideology, or social preferences, whatever we want to call it, we had a huge adversity to profits, to capital accumulation, Because if you look, for instance, we have a tax system where for the companies where the tax rate increases with the profits. So that means the higher the level of the profit, it's not profitability, it's profits. So the higher the level of profits, the higher the tax rate, not the tax rate. What are the companies that have higher profits? The companies that have higher capital, because in order to remunerate higher capital, they need to have higher profits. What really counts, what should really count, would be the profitability rate. So in practice, you are taxing capital. When you are taxing the differential in profits, you are taxing capital accumulation. And if you see the rhetoric in the political parlor, you see, higher profits. This is we have to cut this back. We have to create taxes. We have to do that. So this has somehow created hostility for companies to grow, to have big companies. And on account of that, we have an economic structure where the non-financial companies, around 44% of the employment of this sector takes place in micro companies, not small, micro. Whose productivity is 1/3 of the rest. So when you have 44% of the employment, of course it is the non-financial sector, but 44% caught up in a sector that does not have productivity, this is a strong drag. It's a kind of a heavy anchor on the wages. And because you have this big anchor on the wages, this contaminates the rest of the economy. Because even if you are in a more productive economy, you do not need to pay higher wages. Because you can just dispute these low wages, you pay 10% more, you pay 20% more, but nevertheless, this anchor, it's a dragging force in the overall level of wages. So we are having, in fact, a situation with very low level of wages, which then it's discouraging for people like you that get out of the university with the best training possible, but then there are no jobs here for those. It's not a matter of not liking the country or so on. It's because there are no qualified jobs able to hire you. And when I see my colleagues that have their sons and daughters going out, they say, but then they will return. I always ask, but they return to do what? Because there are no... And to give you... And this is, nowadays, if you ask me, this is the most dramatic challenge that we have at the level of political policy, at the level, of economic policy. It's this problem. Because in the 60s, we have a big wave of immigration. Around 1 million people during the decade left the country. But they were non-qualified workers. So they left the country, and that created a scarcity, and they forced the economy to readjust. And the economy readjust with a big jump in productivity. And it was the biggest jump in productivity in a decade. It was during the 60s. That was very good. Now, in the last decade, we are having the same level of immigration. But the big difference is that now we are exporting talent. We are exporting the most qualified generation. So those that could really contribute to increased productivity, we are exporting them and are retaining those that they cannot improve their productivity because they lack the quality, they lack the training, they lack... this has to do with labor market flexibility, among other things. And this is going to be dramatic, not only for the generation that we are losing, but those that will stay with lower productivity will inherit the debt. So those less able to produce are going to inherit the debt. And the youngest like you, of course, you are to make... I don't know if it is a sacrifice, but at least to leave the country, but you get rid of the burden of the debt.
That's that is a bit of a...
But this is the biggest challenge that that people should be concerned. and there should be a political response, which is not easy. It's a complex. You have to touch upon several keys in order. It has to be a kind of a concerted plan that has to involve the state, the workers, and the companies. So the companies associations, the employees, the employers associations has to involve all of that. But it's really what is we can do that. I wrote an article 1 year and a half ago that was titled. It was around this, and the title was "An Ambition Within Our Reach." Uma ambição a nosso alcance em português. It was published in Observador, and this is, for me, this is the big challenge of today that we have to overcome, that we can to overcome. But the political system is lean in a direction that does not provide that kind of answer.
Okay. Vitor, thank you so much for your time here. It was a pleasure. I think the whole of NEC thanks you for being here for the podcast. For the viewers, if you want to check out Vitor's book from 2013, I guess it still stands the test of time. So if you want to check more about this topic, definitely check this book out. And thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode.